On the night of the wedding, the power suddenly fails, leaving the wedding guests in darkness as the band stops playing. The candles only make the shadows around the marquee more confusing while the storm grows louder outside. The lights have gone out before, but this time they stay off for much longer. When the lights finally return, the dining area is a mess, with wine spilled across the floor and champagne bottles scattered around. The Irish band starts playing again, and some guests move toward the dance tent, while others stay close to the main marquee. The wedding cake has already been cut open, leaving its red sponge exposed, and one guest has walked through broken glass and left bloody footprints behind. The storm is still too strong for the boats to return, so no one can leave the island. Then a scream comes from outside, and everyone freezes as they realize it is a scream of terror. The day before the wedding, nearly all of the wedding party have arrived for the rehearsal dinner, and Aoife, the wedding planner, has put vintage champagne and wine on ice along with Guinness as requested by the bride. Aoife and Freddie live permanently at the Foley, which she restored after working as an event planner in Dublin. She walks through the downstairs rooms of the Foley to light turf blocks in the fireplaces, so the place feels warm and cozy for the evening. While checking the weather forecast, she notices the barometer indicates changing weather and calls to Freddie in the kitchen to make sure everything is under control and the wedding cake is on schedule. Aoife became a wedding planner because she believes she can shape one wedding day into something whole and perfect, even when life itself cannot be controlled. Freddie comes out in his stained butcher's apron and gives her a hug after she admits that she is nervous. He reassures her that everything will work out fine. Freddie used to run a restaurant in Dublin, and he and Aoife have been together for nearly 2 decades. Getting Will Slater and Julia Keegan to hold their wedding at the Foley was a real coup for Aoife. The bride is very particular, which comes with running her own magazine, but Aoife enjoys meeting her demanding requests. The bride and groom have not been together for long, and Aoife and Freddie could hear them in their bedroom the night before. They seem very much in love, though lust might be a better description. It makes Aoife wonder how well they really know each other, and whether they are aware of each other's darkest secrets. On the evening before the wedding, Hannah and her husband Charlie travel by boat to the island as special guests who will stay there overnight while waves rise and crash around them in the rough water. Maddie, the captain, steers the small vessel while Hannah suffers from severe motion sickness, and Charlie reads from his phone about Cormorant Island. Maddie tells them that his family has lived on the island for centuries and that archaeologists found a persecuted religious group packed together in the turf bog about 20 years earlier, all hacked to death. Charlie tries to distract Hannah by talking about the island, but she keeps feeling sick and looks toward the dark shape of the land ahead. Charlie explains that Jules's father is a wealthy Irish property developer who was never really around, though Jules has always idolized him. She once asked Charlie for sailing lessons because her father had a yacht, and she wanted to make him proud. Hannah has secretly been watching Will's survival show, fascinated by the man Jules is about to marry, but she has kept it from Charlie because she knows he would not like it and worries that his dislike of Will might be jealousy. At Hannah's mention of Will, Charlie admits that he does not understand why Jules is marrying him after such a short time and suspects that Will is hiding something. As the boat pitches and rolls through the heavy spray, Charlie points out a cormorant to distract Hannah. She watches it dive into the water and swallow a fish whole before she leans over the side and throws up her cream tea. Jules, the bride, stands in front of the mirror in her room at the Foley wearing her heavy cream silk wedding dress. The weather is perfect, and she hopes it stays like this for tomorrow. She tries not to think about the anonymous note delivered through the letterbox 3 weeks earlier telling her not to marry Will. As she checks the table plan, Jules thinks about how careful planning helped her build the download from a blog into a fully fledged online magazine with a staff of 30. Most of the important guests will stay on the island tonight and tomorrow. Jules has only one bridesmaid, her half-sister Olivia, while her closest friend Charlie will effectively be her best man for the weekend. Charlie and Hannah are the last guests to arrive tonight, and Jules is looking forward to seeing him. Will enters the room and embraces her. Jules reminds herself that she has never believed the superstition about a groom seeing the wedding dress before the wedding. As Will looks over the table plan, he notices Piers and asks why he was invited. Jules explains that Piers produces his show, and that she invited him after meeting his wife. Will says it makes sense, though there is an edge to his reaction. Despite her initial protests, they begin kissing and touching with intense desire as Will rucks up her skirt and pushes her against the furniture. He is about to enter her when Jono, Will's best man, opens the door and interrupts them, admitting that he forgot his suit in England. Will and Jono leave the room, and Jules struggles to control her temper. She wonders why Will keeps Jono around when they are so different. Will is driven and successful, while Jono is a messy dropout. Will once even got Jono a screen test for Survive the Night, although it came to nothing. He says they do not have much in common these days but go back a long way. Jules wonders whether their shared past gives Jono some kind of hold over Will. Will climbs out of a trapdoor onto the Foley battlements carrying cans of Guinness for himself and Jono while they look out over the high drop. Jono apologizes for forgetting his suit and mentions Olivia, but Will immediately warns him that she is off limits because she is his fiancée's sister and only 19. Jono assures Will that he wants to be a good best man and do him proud. Jono used to work at an adventure center in the Lake District, but has now started his own whiskey business, Hellraiser, with stockists lined up. Jono also thinks Will has always cared about money, perhaps because he grew up feeling he had less than some of their classmates. Jono remembers Will telling him about the many women he dated through apps before meeting Jules, whom he now says he is head over heels for. The four ushers, Femi, Angus, Duncan, and Peter, then climb through the trapdoor to join them with more drinks. The group reminisce about St. Trevor, where Will was the center of their group. His father was headmaster, while Jono earned a rugby scholarship after being spotted playing in a tournament in Croydon when he was 11. Jono remembers how different his family background was from the privileged world of the school. Although Jono has not seen much of Will recently, Will still knows him better than anyone, just as Jono knows Will. Will eventually finishes his drink and heads downstairs because Charlie and Hannah are arriving soon, and Jules wants a welcoming party for them. Olivia, the bridesmaid, stays directly below Jules and Will's bedroom, where she can hear every groan and gasp despite trying not to listen, sometimes feeling as if they want to be heard. Since dropping out of university, Olivia has lost contact with her old friends and feels she has left their world. Overwhelmed, she cuts her inner thigh with a razor blade, finding brief focus in the pain. As she considers another cut, Jules knocks on her door. Jules insists that Olivia try on her bridesmaid dress before Hannah and Charlie arrive. Olivia has falsely claimed that it already fits. Jules tells her to come to their room, and Olivia follows her into the master bedroom, which still smells of aftershave and sex. Growing up with Jules often felt like having a second, stricter mother. Olivia strips to her underwear, keeping her legs together in case her thigh is bleeding, ready to say she has her period if Jules notices. Jules criticizes the creased dress and helps her put it on, while Olivia notices a sore burn on Jules's wrist and wonders how she got it, since Jules is normally so careful. Jules notices that the dress is too loose because Olivia has lost weight. Olivia suspects she is jealous of her thinness, remembering Jules's old comments about her weight. After they examine the dress, Jules unexpectedly takes Olivia's hand. She tells Olivia she is proud to have her as a bridesmaid. Jules says their mother told her about Olivia's breakup and explains that, at her age, heartbreak can feel like the end of the world, but that she may later meet someone she truly fits with, as Jules believes she has with Will. Olivia suddenly feels faint and sick, pulls the dress off, and assures Jules she is fine. Jules asks her to make an effort for the wedding because having her as a bridesmaid matters, and Olivia agrees, knowing she is lying. Jules enters Araminta's room and finds her in a silk kimono, applying lipstick and drinking what looks like a martini. Jules asks whether Olivia will behave at the wedding and complains that she has treated being a bridesmaid like a burden, while Araminta says Olivia has been through a difficult time and hints that there is more to her situation than the breakup, reminding Jules that she and Will have not been together very long either. Jules thinks of Charlie at 18 and remembers that Araminta never knew or cared much about her teenage romances, which makes her realize how much closer her mother has always been to Olivia. Araminta's familiar story of raising a baby alone while building her acting career irritates Jules, who remembers her unstable childhood with her mother's boyfriends and parties, including nights when she slept on coats at 6 years old. Olivia's childhood was very different when Rob was around, with Araminta cooking for her, enforcing an early bedtime and giving her a playroom before tiring of playing happy families. Jules resents Olivia for having the happy childhood she lacked, yet remembers how Olivia once followed her around adoringly, leaving her caught between tenderness and envy. When Araminta remarks on how handsome Will's friends are, Jules feels her old envy rising, picks up the heavy Ciré Trudon candle, and imagines smashing it. She reminds herself that she has it under control and has built a stable life of her own. When a boat engine sounds outside, Jules realizes Charlie is arriving, puts the candle down and thinks seeing him will make her feel better. Hannah reaches the island feeling sick and cold after the rough boat ride, clinging to Charlie as they approach the Foley. Charlie squeezes her hand and says that being away from the children will let them be adults again, making Hannah think about how they once spent weekends camping and having sex, but now often feel more like colleagues than lovers. They were the first among their friends to have children, with Hannah pregnant with Ben before they married. She would not change that, but sometimes wonders whether they missed years of carefree life and whether she lost her younger self. They have not had sex in a long time, and Hannah wonders whether Charlie still desires her after pregnancy and breastfeeding changed her body. At the jetty, they see Jules, Araminta and Olivia waiting for them, and Charlie remarks on how much Olivia has grown. Will helps Hannah off the boat, then ignores Charlie's offered handshake and pulls him into a hug, leaving Charlie tense and distant. Jules embraces Charlie warmly and tells him she has missed him, reminding Hannah that Jules has always been the most significant woman in Charlie's life, until Hannah came along. As they walk toward the Foley, Will explains that it was once a coastal defense before becoming a holiday home, and they pass the ruined chapel where the ceremony will take place the next day. Hannah notices how unusually physical Jules is with Will, making their active sex life obvious. Seeing them together brings Hannah's old suspicions about Charlie and Jules back, but she pushes them away. As they near the Foley, men on the battlements burst into mocking laughter, making Hannah suddenly aware of her messy hair and clothes and convinced they are laughing at her. Seeing Charlie again reminds Olivia of how she once followed him around, leaving her embarrassed and sad, so she heads toward the Whispering Cave to hide. The dead baby seal she saw on the beach also makes Olivia think about death as she heads toward the cave. Inside the cave, footsteps make Olivia jump, and she finds Hannah at the entrance. Hannah introduces herself as Charlie's wife and says she came down to give Charlie and Jules space to catch up. Olivia suspects they have slept together in the past, wondering if Hannah has ever thought about it. Olivia offers her a cigarette, which Hannah accepts because the rough crossing has left her shaky. As they smoke, Hannah talks about her family and sister Alice, while Olivia admits that she dropped out of university after her first proper boyfriend, Callum, broke up with her. She says she loved him, and that he once promised to love her forever. Olivia admits that she did not leave university simply because Callum broke up with her, and says that if he had not ended their relationship, none of the rest would have happened. Hannah asks what she means, but Olivia cannot explain. As the light fades, Hannah decides they should return because Charlie hates being late, and tells Olivia that what she said sounded important. Olivia stays behind, relieved she stopped herself from telling Hannah everything. She has told no one, not even her friends, knowing that once spoken, the truth could never be taken back. At 7, while Freddie handles supper, Aoife uses her free half-hour to refresh the flowers in the island graveyard and spend some time alone. As she leaves, Aoife hears the Guinness drinking ushers talking about sending everyone off with a bang and doing something traditional. She considers checking on them but decides it sounds harmless and continues to the graveyard, where childhood memories return. Despite its dark history and ghost stories, the island feels more familiar to Aoife than the mainlanders realize, and she has her own ghosts. At a grave, Aoife says she misses the person buried there and hopes they would be proud of her, then feels the familiar anger rise. A cormorant's cackle draws her attention to the ruined chapel, where the bird sits as an omen of death. Aoife claps to drive it away, but the bird stays and turns its head to watch her with a beady, gleaming eye, as though it knows something she does not. Back at the Foley, Aoife finds the bride sitting very close to Charlie, her hand on his knee. They move apart when she enters. The bride introduces Charlie as tomorrow's MC and says they were going through his duties, making Aoife wonder why she felt the need to explain their closeness. Aoife reminds herself that her job is to stay in the background, but she must still watch everyone and stay one step ahead. Back on the wedding night, the sound of the scream rings in the air like a struck glass while wedding guests freeze and look out from the marquee into the roaring darkness. A teenage waitress stumbles into the tent with wild eyes and tangled hair, her white shirt marking her out as a waitress. The wedding planner approaches gently and asks what has happened, but the girl can only breathe heavily and tremble as though she might be having a fit. The wedding planner puts a comforting hand on her shoulder and tells her she is safe inside, urging her to speak. Finally, the waitress covers her mouth and whispers in a harsh rasp that there is so much blood outside. Just before she collapses, she says, "A body." The day before the wedding, Hannah stands in her large room at the Foley drinking wine and getting ready while thinking about her secret cigarettes with Olivia and feeling excited for the weekend. She puts on a black silky dress and joins the other guests in the drawing room where Jules and Will are holding hands by the candlelight. Will greets Hannah warmly and chats with her about his TV show, while making her feel confident and welcome among the wealthy group. Hannah catches herself. She is a married mother of 2, her husband is right there, and she is talking to a man about to marry her husband's best friend. She meets the other guests, including Georgina and her husband Duncan, who is also one of the ushers, along with Peter, Femi and Angus, while noticing the tension and teasing jokes among the men. Charlie and Jules reminisce about when he taught her to sail, and Jono asks whether they ever slept together, prompting delighted reactions from the ushers. Jules refuses to answer directly, leaving Hannah unsettled before Duncan interrupts by opening a bottle of champagne. When Charlie accidentally mentions Hannah's Edinburgh connection, she quickly changes the subject by asking Will about his survival show, revealing that she has secretly watched it. As the group drinks and talks about Will's school days at Trevelyan and his show, Duncan drops a copper coin into Hannah's champagne and tells her she has been pennied and must drink it all. As the group chants, Hannah reluctantly drinks the whole glass down. Charlie gives her an apologetic wince, but she feels humiliated and alone. She turns away to hide her tears, then sees a distorted face pressed against the window from outside, and her champagne glass slips from her hand and explodes at her feet. Back on the wedding night, it is a few moments before the waitress regains consciousness, uninjured but nearly mute except for low moans and wordless sounds. The head waitress explains that she sent the girl to the Folly for more champagne bottles, while the wedding guests look around anxiously for their loved ones across the crowded tents. One guest suggests the teenage girl simply had a scare out in the pitch-black storm, while another insists someone needs help and they should go outside to look. The wedding planner warns them not to have everyone wandering around the island in the dark and gale, pointing out the bog and cliffs and worrying that someone else could be injured. One of the ushers finally suggests that a group of the men should go out together for safety in numbers. The day before the wedding, Jules scolds her father Ronan for startling Hannah after she drops and breaks her glass, while Ronan grins and his new French wife, Séverine, arrives behind him. Will and Ronan size each other up silently before Will greets him and Séverine, though Jules winces when Will makes a clumsy joke about being famous. Aoife soon announces that dinner is ready, and everyone moves into the dining room, where Jules's parents sit far apart at opposite ends of the table, while Séverine sits right next to Ronan. Aoife and Freddie serve a creamy fish chowder starter, and conversation picks up around the table as Araminta talks to Hannah about Brighton before turning the conversation to Ronan and his twins. Araminta suddenly stands up between courses to give a speech, raising her glass to toast Jules and talking about how her daughter always gets what she wants. Araminta praises Jules, and while making it all about her own pride in raising such an independent daughter, leaving Jules trembling with hidden rage. Jules takes a deep breath and rises to give her own speech, thanking everyone for coming to the remote island and talking about her love for Will and her Irish roots. Will calls out with a cheeky comment about how he had to persuade her to go on a date, and Jules smiles back at him while locking gazes across the table. Even though she feels happy looking at him, a sudden dark thought of that anonymous warning note flashes through her mind and makes her smile waver. Jono sits at the smoky dinner table and tries to cut a dark chocolate tart that shoots off his plate. Duncan teases him while Hannah chats with Jono about his outdoor background and the stag party. Femi and Will reminisce about their school days, and Jono mentions his failed screen test for Survive the Night. The conversation turns to survival, the brutal school tradition of taking younger boys from their beds and abandoning them blindfolded in the dark grounds. Georgina notes that Duncan still thinks survival was character building, while Jono silently remembers his own terrifying night of being left alone in the freezing dark and how it made him feel invincible. Will stands up to fetch a bottle of Jono's new artisanal whiskey, Hellraiser, and Aoife and Freddie bring glasses for everyone to sample it. They look uncomfortable as they serve the group before quickly returning to the kitchen. Jono decides to start a drinking game and goes to the kitchen to ask Aoife for a deck of cards, which she and Freddie reluctantly hand over before returning to the kitchen. Back at the table, Jules's parents and Séverine excuse themselves for bed along with Hannah, who tries to get Charlie to join her, but Jono urges him to stay and live a little, thinking about how the old-school pack mentality always takes over when they get together. Hannah feels wary of the ushers as Jono urges Charlie to join their drinking game. Charlie finally gives in despite Hannah's warning look, and Duncan teases him about being kept on a leash. Jono and the other men stand to chant their old-school motto, "Do brave deeds and endure," followed by the darker phrase, "If I can't move heaven, then I shall raise hell." Their frenzied drumming makes Hannah feel as if she is watching a satanic ritual. Once the chanting stops, the men start a messy drinking game with a disgusting mixture of alcohol and sauce. Fed up with the drunken chaos, Hannah finds Olivia alone in the drawing room. She offers to fetch wine, but Olivia produces a stolen bottle of vodka instead. Angus suddenly stumbles into the room with his trousers around his ankles and his dick flopping out. Hannah disgustedly tells him to fuck off and leave them alone before deciding to sneak out with Olivia to the cave. They pass dark abandoned houses as strange bird noises echo around them. Something flies so close to Hannah's face that she thinks it may be a bat. In the cave, a dark human-shaped figure appears on the rock wall, making her almost drop the bottle before she realizes it is her own shadow. The place is enough to make her believe in ghosts. Back on the wedding night, the four ushers form a search party and grab a first aid kit along with big paraffin torches from the entrance brackets for light. Femi asks if everyone is ready, displaying a strange, fervent excitement like scouts preparing for a mission. The remaining guests watch in relieved silence as the men prepare. From inside the marquee, they look like medieval villagers heading out on a witch hunt. The blackout and the raging storm add to a surreal and macabre atmosphere, making the reported discovery feel almost fantastical and hard to believe since it came from a hysterical teenager. Some guests still hold on to the hope that the whole thing is just a terrible misunderstanding. They watch silently as the small group marches out through the flapping marquee entrance and into the loud, stormy night with their torches held high. The day before the wedding, inside the damp cave where the black water laps at their feet, Olivia and Hannah share a candle and a bottle of vodka, while the acoustics create an echoing whisper that repeats every word they say. Hannah talks about her sister Alice and a bad breakup, prompting Olivia to share the story of her own painful split from her ex-boyfriend Callum. Olivia opens up about feeling lonely in London, seeing Callum's photos online with another girl, and deciding to set up a dating profile under a fake name where she met Stephen, who was much older than her. She initially plans to get a photo with him so Callum will see what he is missing, but ends up going back to Jules's flat and having intense sex with him. She becomes attached to Stephen, but after bringing him to a party held by Jules's magazine, she drinks too much, makes a total mess of herself, and is sent home. Stephen then begins ghosting her. When Hannah asks if she ever saw him again, Olivia cannot speak. An image of red on white, all the blood, stops her. As they finish the vodka and head back to the Foley, Hannah says she is exhausted and ready for bed, while Olivia stays outside in the hallway to clear her head and avoid the noisy drinking game, still playing outside her room. Jono suddenly approaches her with a wet joint and aggressively grabs her arm, trying to hit on her and suggesting they dance together tomorrow as best man and bridesmaid. Olivia feels deeply unsettled by his menacing behavior and angrily tells him to get off her before yanking her arm away and fumbling with the door to escape back inside to her room. Jono returns to his room after finishing a joint bought in Dublin, hoping it will help him sleep despite the island's memories and the waves crashing below. The island reminds him of Trevelyan's and brings back memories of the secret he has tried to bury for years. Lying in bed after drinking and smoking, he feels like cockroaches are crawling all over his skin and worries that he will suffer from the same terrifying dreams he experienced the previous night. He sits up and tries to convince himself that he is just being paranoid from the weed, but when he looks into the dark corner of the room, he feels certain that a terrifying figure is standing there watching him. Overwhelmed by fear, he realizes that the figure is someone he knows, then whispers apologies into the darkness and insists that nothing was his fault before rushing to the bathroom to throw up violently into the toilet bowl. Jules and Charlie stand on the battlements looking at the mainland lights. She rests her head on his shoulder, remembering how she once wanted him and still thinks about their night together. Charlie asks whether Will really makes her happy, and Jules asks whether he thinks he could have made her happier. Charlie insists they would not have worked and are only good friends, but Jules suspects he is jealous. Jules suddenly asks whether Charlie wrote her a note. His confused reaction tells her he did not, so she dismisses the question and decides to turn in. Later that night, Jules returns to her room and shares an intense intimate moment with Will as they make love against the bed, while she enjoys the feeling that they are the most attractive couple. After Will heads to the bathroom for a shower, Jules notices a strong briny smell of the sea lingering in the room and opens the window to look out at the moonlit waves crashing against the rocks. When Will steps back into the room and Jules slips into bed, her bare legs suddenly press against something cold and heavy hidden beneath the covers. She leaps out in absolute terror and screams, prompting Will to pull back the duvet and reveal a massive pile of dark, wet seaweed in their bed. Will calms her by explaining that it is seaweed, probably an old-school prank by Jono, Duncan, or the others. He calls it an old-school prank and tells her to leave it alone. He goes for a new sheet and duvet from the spare room, meant for his parents, and bitterly remarks that his father has never been impressed by anything he has done, including getting married. As Will tells her to get some sleep, Jules thinks about how perfect he seems, but the note comes back to her. He is not the man he says he is, a cheat and a liar, and she should not marry him. There is a strange noise outside that sounds more human than animal, and Aoife and Freddie look at one another in their bedroom after all the guests have gone to bed. Aoife remembers the ushers chanting from earlier, and she decides to go outside to check despite Freddie warning her that it is not safe. Aoife steps into the velvet blackness, seeing the kitchen aglow and light from the couple's room. She hears someone sobbing and catches movement near the outbuildings behind the Foley. Calling out into the dark, Aoife clicks on her torch and sweeps the beam around until it catches a figure with dark wild hair and gleaming eyes. She steps back before recognizing Jono slumped against the wall of the outbuilding. Jono sounds slurred and hoarse when he asks who is there, and Aoife tells him it is her. Jono gives her a crooked grin with tear tracks catching in the beam, and Aoife tells him it is not safe for him to wander around the dark outbuildings without a torch. Jono stands up as a big man smelling of weed and alcohol, saying it is time for Johnny Boy to go to bed because he had too much and thought he was seeing things. Aoife watches as Jono turns and lurches toward the Foley, seeming caught between miserable and terrified like a man who had seen a ghost. Hannah wakes up with a headache after drinking the night before, finding Charlie fast asleep and remembering his flirting with Jules. Feeling turned on by vivid dreams and memories of Will and Olivia, Hannah tries to initiate intimacy with Charlie, but he pushes her away, saying he is too tired. Feeling angry and rejected, Hannah leaves the bedroom to go for a walk and meets Aoife in the kitchen. Aoife suggests she walk past the chapel, take wellies to avoid the bog, and use the mobile signal at the crest of the island. Hannah heads outside into the windy morning and wanders into the old graveyard, where she finds a well-kept grave with a little jar of wildflowers in front of it. From the dates, she thinks it must belong to a child, a young girl named Darcy Malone, whose gravestone reads "Lost to the Sea." She looks towards the sea and remembers Maddie saying that many had drowned crossing it. He never said when, and she had assumed it was hundreds of years ago. Now she wonders if it was more recent. To think, this was someone's child. Hannah hears Aoife calling out that she is going the wrong way and pointing her towards the path. As Hannah continues, the path disappears and she finds herself in increasingly boggy ground. She uses the signal to call home and speaks to her mother and son, learning that Lottie had been sick but is now fine. The call makes Hannah think about her children and her powerful bond with Alice, reminding her of how protective they had always been of each other. She then realizes that Olivia reminds her of Alice when she was struggling, remembering how thin and fragile Alice looked after returning from university. Still disoriented, Hannah continues through the bog and eventually slips, sinking into the peat until it reaches over her knees. She panics and calls for help, but her cries are swallowed by the wind. Just as she fears being pulled under completely, Duncan and Pete appear and pull her out by her hands. She loses one of her boots to the bog. Shaking and filthy, Hannah thanks them and hurries back towards the Foley in her socked feet, eager to put distance between herself and the bog and wash the dirt off before the wedding. Aoife sits at her desk going through plans, listening to the forecast warn that it will get windy later, particularly in West Galway. Freddie comes in to say he and Maddie went to the mainland for supplies, while Aoife prepares for the florist and local wildflowers. Freddie returns to the kitchen to prepare food, and Aoife walks over to the marquee, where she sees hares startled from their hollows in the heather before they disappear into the long grass. Inside the marquee, Aoife fills space heaters and sets up tables with menus and napkins, imagining how the structure will glow tonight against the dark island. Then Will appears and asks if she has seen any ushers. Aoife greets him, hiding her excitement at finally meeting Will in person. She and Freddie have watched survive the night from the start. She asks if he slept well. He tells her about the seaweed prank. Will stays to chat and asks Aoife about her life on the island, and she briefly mentions coming here on summer holidays as a child. Will asks about her background and her relationship with Freddie, and Aoife keeps her answers brief to maintain professional boundaries. Will places a hand on her shoulder for a beat too long before leaving. Aoife senses something darker beneath his charm and feels that he is reminding her that he is in charge and she must dance to his tune. The search party marches into the darkness as strong winds buffet them and their paraffin torches flicker. They call out as they move between the Foley and the marquee. Femi suggests spreading out to search faster, but Angus refuses because of the surrounding bog, so they stick together. Duncan remarks that the waitress must have screamed loudly to be heard over the wind. Then 2 torches go out, and Angus admits he is frightened. Before anyone can respond, Pete stumbles and sinks into the bog. The others quickly pull him out. Duncan tells him he is the second person they have rescued from the bog that day, reminding him that he and Femi rescued Charlie's wife earlier. Pete then starts talking about bodies in the bog, but Duncan dismisses him as being out of his mind and calls him a liability. The men begin to realize how dangerous and unprepared they are for the search. Earlier that day, Jules wakes on her wedding day uneasy after dreaming of the ruined chapel crumbling to dust around her, with the smell of seaweed still lingering. She looks at her wedding dress and remembers the delicate lace lingerie she is wearing beneath her robe that we'll discover later. Looking out the window, she sees Olivia walking dangerously close to the rocky edge by the crashing sea before stepping back. Jules decides to do her own makeup, but a sudden tremor in her hand sends her makeup bag crashing to the floor. Among the spilled items lies a tiny soot-blackened note warning her not to marry Will Slater because he is a cheat and a liar. Jules remembers the cruel online comments she and Will received after pictures of them emerged, filled with vitriol from strangers. The hand-delivered note feels much more personal and threatening because someone had to come to their home in Islington to leave it. She recalls burning her wrist on the log burner when she snatched the note back, leaving a mark on her skin. She rips the note into pieces, takes them to the bathroom, and flushes them down the toilet. Refusing to let it ruin her day, Jules picks up her makeup and decides that today is going to be bloody brilliant. Back on the wedding night, the search party pushes through the darkness, wondering if they will find a body. Duncan compares the search to their old school game of survival, but Femi angrily reminds him that someone actually died during it. Angus agrees the ritual was cruel and accuses Duncan of enjoying terrifying younger boys, forcing Femi to step in and calm them. They fall silent as the wind rises to a shrieking howl, flaying their skin, blinding them with tears and making it hard to hear. Angus admits it feels unreal, and they wonder what happened. Duncan suggests someone may have wandered out of the marquee and had an accident. They discuss Charlie, who was drunk, and then the bridesmaid, whom Duncan thinks may have been trying to top herself. Pete suddenly points into the darkness and says someone is coming. They turn and see a light approaching. Duncan recognizes the wedding planner's husband and feels relieved, but Angus notices something strange in his hand. Earlier that day, Olivia sits in her room in her bra and pants, watching boats carry guests to the island with a throbbing head and ache in her chest. She remembers scrubbing blood from her dress after cutting her own thigh, and the sight of it brings back the memory of what happened months earlier. She feels trapped and claustrophobic. Desperate to talk to Hannah as she did the night before, Olivia decides to find her and tell her the rest of her secret. She tiptoes upstairs, but near Hannah's room hears raised voices and sees Charlie through the open door in his boxers, gripping the chest of drawers in anger. Before she can knock, another door opens and Will appears in suit trousers and an open white shirt, asking what she is doing there. Olivia barely manages to whisper that it is nothing before returning to her room, feeling she has missed her chance. Looking out at the approaching boats, she feels they are bringing something bad to the island, then realizes it is already there. Her and what she has done. Aoife watches the wedding guests arrive by boat from the jetty, welcoming them in smart outfits, many looking seasick after the crossing. A couple in their 60s arrives on the final boat, the groom's parents. She notices the mother's quiet shyness and the father's sharp, authoritarian features. He gives Aoife a crushing handshake and introduces himself as a headmaster at Trevelyan's, where many of the guests went to school. He proudly jokes about his reputation as a disciplinarian and how seeing him must put the fear of God into them, making Aoife instinctively dislike him as she leads him toward the chapel. Afterward, Aoife thanks Maddie for captaining the final boat and coordinating arrivals. Maddie says the wedding will put the island on the map, but warns the weather will turn badly. Aoife mentions the forecast, but Maddie dismisses the studio weather reports and points out a stain of darkness far out at sea. She sees it too and realizes a severe storm is brewing. Jono gets ready with Will, honored to be his best man despite suspecting Will had been cutting him out. Jono admits he pushed his way back in by calling Will and declaring that he would be his best man. Will's spare suit is far too small for Jono, making him hot and sweaty beside Will's fitted Seville Row suit. Jono remembers buying a Paul Smith suit with Will that made him feel slimmer and more confident. Duncan, Pete, Femi and Angus arrive and tease Jono about his tight clothes while joking about Will's reputation as a boy who looked innocent but got away with everything. They recall Trevelyan's and Will's headmaster father. Jono remembers that Will pushed him into things because he knew he could get away with them, unlike Jono, who feared losing his scholarship. Jono remembers that Will slept with a local school girl and circulated topless Polaroids of her, making him untouchable at school. Jono remembers Loner, a first-year who idolized Will and surprisingly survived his first term without breaking down. The seaweed memory brings up the prank. The men deny putting seaweed in Will and Jules's bed, but Will clearly suspects one of them. A knock interrupts them as Charlie arrives for his buttonhole. Jono tosses him the flower, but Charlie fumbles it and leaves quickly as the men stifle their laughter. Aoife then calls from outside that the guests are waiting in the chapel. As the others head out, Will stops Jono and quietly asks him not to embarrass him with his speech. Jono promises to make him proud. Jules puts on her gold crown, picks up her bouquet, and meets her father in the drawing room. He tells her the guests are waiting in the chapel, and Jules, already nervous, asks what he thinks of Will now that he has finally met him. Her father calls Will charming and handsome, but avoids saying whether he truly likes him. His hesitation makes Jules suspect that his silence is an answer, especially after the warning note unsettled her. She presses him for a clear opinion, but he refuses to lie and says she has been with Will long enough to know him herself. Hurt, Jules reminds him that she is his daughter of 34 years and that his approval still matters deeply to her. She tells him she chose Ireland partly because of their shared Irish heritage and insists that he must walk her down the aisle and look happy for her. When Aoife knocks to say it is time, Jules says she needs a moment and storms upstairs, overwhelmed by the argument. There, she looks for something to release her anger and grabs the vase that held her bridal bouquet, smashing it against the wall. Calmer, she cleans up the glass, fixes her crown and composes herself before returning downstairs. Olivia appears pale but ready in her bridesmaid dress, and Jules collects her bouquet before setting off with Olivia and her father. As Jules walks down the aisle, her confidence falters. The mournful folk music, fast-moving clouds and wind whistling through the ruined chapel make the guests seem like strangers, and she feels a sudden wave of dread. Her father's doubts and the warning note echo in her mind. But then the mist in her thoughts clears. She sees her friends and family smiling at her, and finally Will waiting at the altar in his immaculate suit. The sunlight briefly breaks through the clouds around him, and Jules is overwhelmed by how handsome and radiant he looks. Looking at Will, all her doubts disappear, and she smiles as she walks toward him. Hannah sits alone on a crowded bench during the wedding ceremony, watching Jules walk up the aisle looking oddly afraid before transforming into the radiant bride who greets Will. The ceremony proceeds smoothly, and Hannah tries unsuccessfully to catch a glimpse of Charlie at the front. After the service, the guests stream outside to throw dried rose petals, but the stiff breeze whisks them all away towards the sea. Hannah heads to the bar for a gin and tonic, chatting with two young local barmen, Owen and Sean, who mention dark island tales of unquiet souls and Vikings in the bog. She then peeks inside the luxurious marquee, admiring the elegant tables and huge wedding cake. Outside again, she notices the wind strengthening and white horses appearing on the waves. Returning to the crowd, Hannah feels increasingly out of place among the wealthy private school guests, embarrassed by her fascinator and reminded of being the only child in school uniform on home clothes day. She strikes up a conversation with a former schoolmate of Will, who quickly loses interest in her, then meets Will's parents, where his father coldly questions her about children and praises Trevelyan's severe methods. Spotting Charlie with the other ushers, Hannah hurries over, only to feel a dart of anger when he tells her to take off her fascinator. Rory approaches and makes vague jokes about the stag do, leaving Charlie tight-lipped and defensive. When Hannah asks what happened and whether he has been drinking, Charlie snaps that he does not want to talk about it, confirming her fears that he has been drinking. Jono downs his glass of champagne and takes another, feeling small as he looks at everything Will has and remembering his own past mistakes. Old school friends come up to chat and joke with him about his suit and about who he might try to flirt with tonight. But Jono feels like he does not belong among their high-powered careers and successful lives. He thinks about the old-school photo his parents keep proudly on their living room mantelpiece. And he remembers the younger kids like Loner who used to run errands, steal food, and suffer abuse just to please Will and the older boys. As Jono tries to slip away, Will's father stops him and calls him by his full name, Jonathan Briggs, reminding him of his ill-fitting blazer and accusing Jono of doing Will's dirty work by breaking into the office to steal GCSE papers years ago. Terrified by the headmaster, Jono manages to escape and heads to the bar near the marquee to drink something stronger, where his trembling hand pours his whiskey. Piers, the producer of Survive the Night, spots Jono in the crowd and comes over to talk to him. Jono remembers how Will praised his idea of turning their old-school game of survival into a TV show and got them both a screen test. When Jono hesitated over what happened at school, Will insisted it was an accident, and Jono agreed. Only Will went on with the show. Now Piers tells Jono that their loss is whiskey's gain, leaving him confused. Jono takes a drink and bluntly asks Piers what the hell he is talking about. On the horizon, the stain of bad weather spreads as the breeze stiffens, sending hats and cocktail garnishes flying while the singer's voice rises with the traditional Irish song Aoife's mother used to sing to them as children. The song briefly overwhelms Aoife, but she forces herself to focus as guests crowd around her with demands about gluten-free food, signal strength, photos, and seating. Moving through the busy marquee and lawn, she guides guests away from danger and stops a group entering the fragile old graveyard with their drinks. Although bringing people back to the island was what she wanted, watching them treat the deserted place like a tourist attraction makes their presence feel like an overwhelming and painful trespass. Olivia suffers through hours of the ceremony, holding her rose bouquet so tightly that the thorns bite through the ribbon, and she has to suck the blood from her palms in secret. Afterward, she forces herself through photos and questions from relatives about Callum and her first year at Exeter. Feeling suffocated and exhausted by their kind faces, Olivia slips away and heads towards the cliffs, leaving her dirty shoes behind as she climbs down a steep bank through thorny bushes until she tumbles onto a wet beach. Sitting on the sand, she takes out a razor blade from her bag and presses it to her leg, watching the blood appear while remembering the termination she underwent after discovering she was pregnant. Her mum took her to the clinic to have it done and comforted her afterward, but Olivia never told her that Callum was not the father. Believing the freezing sea will clear her mind, Olivia walks fully clothed into the water until it reaches her chest and shoulders, making it hard to breathe. A wave crashes over her, filling her mouth and nose with salty water as she begins to gag and choke, her body fighting frantically for air as she realizes she is actually drowning in the rough sea. Will and Jules have their photos taken beside the cliffs as the wind strengthens, and when Jules slips her tongue into Will's mouth and he kisses her back passionately, the photographer suggests it is a little too racy for the official records. Returning to the guests, Jules notices Will distractedly watching Piers talking to Jono, which makes her uneasy. She retreats to the Foley for a quiet glass of water, only to gasp when Freddie appears holding a large carving knife, his apron smeared with blood. Freddie explains he is carving the lamb, and Jules leaves the kitchen just as she notices the crowd gathering to watch something in the sea. She pushes through and realizes Olivia is drowning. Jules runs towards the beach, where Will, Charlie, Jono, and the other men rescue Olivia, with Will carrying her from the water. Seeing red scratches on Will's face triggers a sudden rage in Jules. When Hannah gently says Olivia may need help, Jules snaps at her to back off, then grabs Olivia and demands to know what she was doing. Their mother arrives and embraces them both, while the other guests gather around in silence. Jules has no idea how to handle the situation until Aoife steps in, calmly takes control, and leads everyone back towards the marquee for the wedding breakfast. Jono watches Will carry Jules's sister from the water, reflecting that Will has always been ruthless and skilled at showing people exactly what he wants them to see, while Jono has kept his secrets because they are both of theirs to keep. Piers tells Jono that Will goes down well with women, but can seem too smooth to male viewers, and that Jono would have balanced him out on the show. Jono is shocked when Piers reveals that Will told the producers they had discussed it, and Jono had decided the show was not for him. Jono realizes Will deliberately cut him out while making it look like someone else's decision, just as he has used Jono since school and thrown him under the bus to keep the spotlight. When Will walks over and asks what they are gossiping about, Jono swallows his whiskey in one gulp and vows to get his own back on the friend who betrayed him. Hannah goes to the Foley and finds Olivia sitting on her bed wrapped in a towel, insisting that she is fine and only needs to change before returning to the marquee. Hannah gently asks why she went into the water, and Olivia admits that the wedding, the people and everyone asking how happy she was had become too much, and she simply wanted to get away from it all. Hannah then tells Olivia about her sister Alice, who was brilliant, got into one of the UK's top universities, and fell intensely in love with her first boyfriend. When Alice eventually ended the relationship, he threatened to make her pay and later uploaded a private video of her to the university intranet, with copies spreading across campus and Facebook. Alice was too ashamed to tell her family. Hannah tells Olivia that it is always better to speak openly about shame and that she can tell her anything. Before Hannah can tell her the rest, Charlie's voice comes over the loudspeaker asking guests to take their seats for the wedding breakfast. Hannah does not tell Olivia that the video of Alice giving some guy a blowjob and more became an indelible stain on her life, fueling a tangled mass of anxiety that no one saw until it was too late. Alice believed she could never work in politics as she had dreamed. 17 years ago this month, she took painkillers and pretty much anything else she could find from the medicine cabinet in the bathroom and killed herself. Aoife blames herself for what happened to Olivia because she had noticed the warning signs but became distracted by the demanding guests. Seeing Olivia in the water reminds Aoife of another day when she was powerless to help. This time, rescue was possible. Aoife sees the groom walking out of the water with Olivia, but wonders whether she could have prevented it by paying closer attention. She keeps her professional composure while getting the guests back into the marquee, then finds Freddie in the catering area and asks him to step outside with her. She confesses that Olivia could have drowned and that she feels responsible for not paying enough attention. Freddie firmly reassures her that Olivia is safe and tells her to forget the what-ifs and focus on getting through the next few hours. Aoife admits that the wedding has been harder than she imagined, especially after the men's behavior and what happened with Olivia have brought the past back. Grounded by Freddie's support, she accepts that she must pull herself together and finish the day. Back on the wedding night, Freddie hurries toward the group through the darkness with a torch, sweat shining on his forehead, and tells them to return to the marquee because the Gardaí have been called. Angus urges them to wait for the police, but Femi and Duncan argue that the police will not arrive soon in such weather and that they are effectively alone. Freddie's warning that the waitress thinks she saw someone else in the darkness raises the possibility that Olivia's drowning was not an accident. The men grip their torches a little tighter as Duncan shouts that they would make good weapons if it comes down to it. Then Angus realizes Pete is missing, and they call his name into the darkness without getting an answer. Duncan says it's not the first time Pete has been in that state, and that he can look after himself. The others suspect he's made an effort to sound more certain than he really is, but they aren't going to question it. They want to believe it too. Earlier that day, inside the marquee, the guests enjoy a warm respite from the strengthening wind and Freddie's excellent rack of lamb, but Jules feels hollow as she remembers Olivia's pleading expression in the water. After the plates are cleared, the lights shiver and go out because of the wind. The ushers howl like wolves in the darkness until the lights return to cheers from the guests. Jules reflects on why she chose the venue, admitting that although she publicly presented it as the result of a competition, the real reason was that her father had cut off the money supply, or Severine had done it for him, forcing her to find a cheaper option. Aoife offered a 50% discount, and she knows Jules will feature the wedding venue in the magazine, and that Will's presence will bring it plenty of attention, making it worthwhile for Aoife. Her father then stands to give his speech, drinking Guinness and praising Jules for always knowing her own mind and pursuing her ambitions with single-minded determination. He admits he has hardly been present in her life and acknowledges his past marriages before telling her how proud he is of everything she has achieved. His words unexpectedly overwhelm Jules, and she struggles to hide her tears. He then turns to Will, warning him with a grim smile that he had better look after Jules and that if he ever hurts her, he will come for him. The room falls into a strained silence until Jules forces a laugh, though she knows the threat was not a joke. Olivia watches Jules look a wreck after her father sits down, her face red from crying. She feels sorry for her despite everything and still shivers from the cold sea. She has changed back into last night's dress to annoy Jules as little as possible, wrapping her arms around herself to stop her teeth chattering. Will stands up to give his speech amid cheers, thanks everyone for coming, and tells Jules he feels like the luckiest man in the world, making her beam back at him with radiant happiness. He recalls their first meeting at a V&A party for the download as a sliding doors moment, raising a toast to luck and giving fate a helping hand. He then toasts Olivia as his new sister and praises his beautiful, clever wife. Olivia keeps her eyes on the floor as everyone raises their glasses. Will continues by describing how he and Jules met, prompting Olivia to remember that she did not meet Jules's fiancé until after they were engaged. Jules had kept him secret until she had the ring on her finger, then stage managed their first meeting at their mother's house before lunch at a cafe, warning Olivia and their mother, "Do not fuck this up for me." When Will arrived, Olivia realized that he was actually Stephen, the man she had met before, and went to the bathroom, where she threw up before sinking to the floor beside the toilet, unable to move. Jules eventually came upstairs and told Olivia they needed to leave for lunch and said she would love her to join, but if she was too unwell, she understood, though Olivia could hear that Jules was not happy about it, and told her she should try to be happy for her before leaving without her. Olivia remembers how smoothly Stephen hid his own shock when he first saw her, showing only a brief flicker of recognition. She cannot think of him as Will. To her, he will always be Stephen. She realizes she had never thought that he might have lied too when she used a fake name on the dating app. At their engagement drinks, she decided to confront him rather than hide again, but Will pretended they had never met, making her doubt herself for a moment. She knew it was him from the way the skin around his eyes creased, the 2 moles on his neck, and the brief reaction she had seen when he first recognized her. Olivia realizes he was deliberately making it harder for her to tell Jules the truth, relying on her being too pathetic to say anything to Jules because she wouldn't believe her. Hannah feels uneasy during Will's speech, noticing that Charlie is seated far away at the top table and realizing how distant they have become over the last 24 hours. Peter Ramsey sits next to her on the other side, speaking so quickly that he makes her feel dizzy. Charlie rises to his feet to introduce Jonathan Briggs, and Jono stumbles slightly as he takes the microphone and stands before the crowd. Jono is drunk and has also taken cocaine before the speech, leaving him unusually jittery but clear-headed as he gives his increasingly threatening speech. Jono looks at Will with a dangerous glitter in his eyes and tells the guests that their old school, Trevelyan's, was like a prison camp crossed with the Lord of the Flies, where they survived dark times together. Jono goes on to reveal that he never kept the expensive Paul Smith suit because he could not afford it and, at first, thought Will might get it for him. He explains that he returned it and pretended he had left it at home, so he could wear Will's spare suit instead. He jokes that Will is a stingy bastard despite being wealthy, while Will's smile grows increasingly strained and the guests watch in shocked silence as the tension builds. Jono puts his hand on Will's shoulder and asks him if he would ever screw him over, and when Will nervously answers that he would not, Jono mentions the dark history and secrets they share. The ushers rise from their seats and grab Will, while Jono takes off his tie and wraps it around Will's eyes as a blindfold before they hoist him onto their shoulders and march him out of the marquee into the growing darkness. The ushers drop Will on the floor of the Whispering Cave, where the smell of rotting seaweed and sulfur fills the air as the rough sea crashes against the rocks outside. They bind his wrists and ankles with their ties as part of the old-school tradition. The ushers leave Will in the cave, while Jono tells them he is going to take a leak. Once the others are gone, Jono turns back and returns to the cave alone. When Jono approaches, a blindfolded Will asks him to take the blindfold off, but Jono refuses and confronts him about the past and his betrayal, admitting that he had wanted to tell everyone the truth during his speech but chickened out, just as he had failed to tell the teachers what happened after Loner's death. Jono reveals that his whiskey business is fake, and that he was actually fired from the wilderness retreat for being stoned on the job after letting a client go too fast on an abseil and break his ankle. He explains that he smokes cannabis to get by and forget how he feels his life stopped at Trevelyan's. Will tries to defend himself and calm Jono down, but Jono bitterly declares that the past does not seem to affect Will, who always gets away with everything. Hannah stays seated at her table while the ushers explode back into the marquee, noticing Jules sitting very still at the deserted top table. Hearing raised voices and a commotion from the bar tent, Hannah hurries over and finds Charlie crouched on the floor, his fist raised as he half-straddles Duncan. When Hannah demands to know what he is doing, Charlie comes to his senses and gets up. As they sit down together, Charlie confesses that Duncan was mouthing off about the stag do. He tells Hannah about the brutal stag do in the Arctic Circle. Charlie took magic mushrooms with the others, surprising Hannah because he is normally sensible and safety-conscious. He explains that everyone else was doing it and that, in a group of men like that, it was hard to say no, especially because he already felt like the odd one out for not having gone to their school. Hannah thinks that Charlie is 34 and wonders what he would say to Ben if his friends pressured him into doing something he did not want to do. The men then took canoes to another island, jumped into the water naked and dared Charlie to swim to a third tiny island. When he returned, they had gone, leaving him there without his canoe. He was stranded naked for hours in the freezing cold, coming down from the mushrooms and eventually lying on the ground sobbing. Charlie says Will was behind the stag do bullying, with Jono also involved and the others following their instructions. Hannah does not believe Will was responsible, but Charlie insists that she only doubts him because she wants to sleep with Will, pointing to the way she looked at Will and spoke about him. Furious, Hannah brings up Charlie's relationship with Jules and asks whether they ever had sex. Charlie admits they did once, but when Hannah presses him about when, she realizes it happened after they were together and after she had been, while she was struggling with borderline postnatal depression and waiting for her stitches to heal. Charlie apologizes, explaining that he and Jules had gone out for drinks after Jules had broken up with her boyfriend, and that they had both agreed afterwards it was a terrible idea and would never happen again. Crushed by the betrayal and disgusted by his behavior, Hannah refuses to listen to his apologies, tells him he is an embarrassment, and storms away. Will laughs when Jono accuses him of living in the past, and insists he cannot move on from the toxic tragedy of their youth because they killed a boy named Loner years ago at Trevelyan's. Jono remembers that Loner discovered the stolen GCSE papers, which Will had taken because he feared his father's reaction and needed the grades. When Loner confronted Will about the papers and said taking them was cheating, Will decided they would play survival to scare him into silence. They gagged and blindfolded Loner with a rugby sock, carried him down the cliff path to the beach, and Will produced rugby boot laces and told Jono to tie Loner to the handrail. They then left him there. The next morning, Jono realized the tide had come in and feared that Loner had drowned. Later, Loner was found dead, and the school treated his death as a tragic accident. Will pressured Jono into agreeing to say they had been in bed and knew nothing, keeping the truth secret. Will's father, who is the headmaster, protects them, while the local police chief is his drinking acquaintance. Another pupil claims to have seen them in the dorm, but the allegation goes nowhere. Jono grips Will and tells him they killed Loner, but Will fights him off, denies knowing what he is talking about, and tells him to get a grip and stop fantasizing. Jono gets angrier as Will defends himself and minimizes what happened, declaring that he is finally going to tell everyone the truth instead of protecting Will's golden boy image any longer. Just as Will threatens Jono and tells him he would ruin both of their lives, the wedding planner's voice echoes in the cave as she arrives to rescue Will, having been sent by Jules. The wedding planner remains totally calm and professional as Jono unties Will and helps him up, and the two men follow her out of the cave. In the marquee, celebrations move into a wilder gear as guests finish the champagne and turn to cocktails, shots, and fine white powder spilled in the Foley toilets. Aoife reflects on how adults behave like children when freed from responsibilities, ready to swarm the dance floor before the first dance. Earlier, when Aoife checked upstairs in the Foley, she walked into the bride and groom's bedroom and caught another man and woman having sex on the bed. Both appeared to be wearing wedding bands, but Aoife knew they were not married to each other because the seating plan placed all husbands and wives opposite one another. They relaxed when they realized she would keep their secret. Aoife is not surprised by these hidden affairs and gossip, having even overheard words from the best man in the cave. She knows a wedding can be planned perfectly if guests obey certain bounds, but if they break them, the fallout can last far longer than 24 hours. The band begins to play, and Will, looking slightly untidy after returning to the marquee, takes Jules's hand as they step onto the dance floor. The drunk guests crowd around them, cheering and shouting. Jules smiles because she is expected to, but her jaw aches from keeping it up. She has drunk a lot, yet feels more wary and nervous than relaxed, still unsettled by Jono's speech. Will dances with her, but twice he steps on the train of her dress, forcing her to pull it away before she trips. It is unlike him to be so clumsy, and he seems distracted. Jules asks what happened, but Will brushes it off as the boys messing around, and says it was Jono's idea. She asks about the seaweed prank, the speech, and the secrets Jono mentioned. Will sharply tells her to drop it, tightening his grip on her arm until it hurts. When she pulls away and tells him he is hurting her, he immediately apologizes. His anger disappears at once, replaced by the same smile Jules has never been able to resist since she first saw it at the V&A. But it no longer has the same effect on her. The speed of his change makes her uneasy, as though he has simply pulled on a mask. Will tells her that Jono is a fantasist, obsessed with something from their past and jealous of the life Will has built. As the song reaches its peak, Will pulls Jules close and promises that after tonight he will cut Jono out of their lives for good. Hannah sees Will pull Olivia into a dance, as it is time for the groom to dance with the bridesmaid, but notices that Olivia looks trapped. Something about the moment reminds Hannah of a detail from Will's speech. She remembers Olivia telling her that she brought Stephen to a party at the V&A hosted by Jules, and suddenly has a thought that seems impossible, so she dismisses it as a weird coincidence. A handsome man stops Hannah as she pushes past, introduces himself as Luis, and pulls her onto the dance floor. Choosing not to mention her husband, Hannah allows Luis to draw her closer as they move to the music, feeling a sudden stir of desire and enjoying the flattering way he sees her. Back on the wedding night, the men move in a tight group through the darkness, spooked by shadows and shapes that turn out to be tricks of the eye, while trying not to think about the still missing Pete. They trip and stumble over the uneven ground, calling to one another for reassurance as they try to keep their fear under control. Femi sweeps his torch in a wide arc and lights up several upright forms, which Angus recognizes as the old graveyard with its eerie Celtic crosses and crumbling stone monuments. They move away from the graveyard, but soon hear the crashing sea and feel the ground shudder beneath their feet. As they turn in another direction, Angus spots something on the ground and points it out. Femi steps forward and picks it up, lifting it into the torchlight. Although it is mangled and twisted out of shape, they immediately recognize the object as a gold crown. Earlier that day, Olivia wanders around the edges of the marquee, picking up half-full glasses and drinking them to get as drunk as possible, while remembering Will's warning after their dance that her earlier stunt was the end of it and there would be no more. Sick of the guests grabbing and touching her, she is suddenly seized by her cousin Beth and dragged into the crowded dance tent. The room spins and Olivia trips over her high shoes, hitting her head hard on the floor as Beth calls for help. Will steps forward with a kind smile and offers to help her up. Olivia bats his hand away, but he lifts her up anyway and takes her outside into the howling wind. She feels too tired and drunk to resist. He takes her around the other side of the marquee, towards where the land gives way to the sea, and she realizes that, for the first time in a long time, it is just the two of them, her and Will. Jules realizes her new husband has disappeared as the guests focus on their own fun, leaving her feeling as though she has lost control of her big day. When she asks around, her cousin Beth tells her that Will went outside with Olivia because she was drunk and needed some air. Jules goes outside into the howling wind and darkness, and, after being directed around the marquee, finally spots their faint outlines near the sea. She notices they are standing unusually close together and, for a horrible moment, wonders what it could mean. They barely know each other, so she cannot understand why they have gone somewhere so private. Something stops her from calling out, so she silently moves towards them through the growing darkness to find out what they are talking about. Olivia tells Will that she is going to tell Jules about their past relationship, remembering Hannah's advice that it is always better to get secrets out in the open. Will quickly clamps a hand over her mouth, reminding her in a calm and gentle voice that telling the truth will only destroy her sister's happiness on her wedding day. When he removes his hand, Olivia realizes that he is right about her hesitation, remembering how she had previously tried to plant doubts by sending an anonymous warning note to Jules instead of confronting her directly. Remembering how Jules was fooled at the altar, Olivia finds her anger again and holds up her mobile phone, warning Will that she has saved all their text messages to prove everything. In a sudden move, Will grabs her wrists, snatches the phone from her hands, and hurls it far out into the dark water, where it disappears with a small splash. When Olivia mentions backups, Will sneers and threatens her by mentioning photos he keeps on his own phone of her performing for him, reminding her that he could easily claim she sent them to him and deny everything because he was not in them at all, not his face or voice. Olivia feels a confusing mix of hatred and lingering attraction as his face draws near. For a crazy moment, she thinks he might be about to kiss her, and despite hating herself for it, a tiny part of her still wants him. But she panics as he tightens his grip on her wrist and starts yanking her forward. She trips and loses a shoe, suddenly realizing that they are not far from the cliff edge, and that Will is pulling her towards the dark water. Back on the wedding night, the ushers stare at the mangled gold crown in Femi's hand. It seems so out of place where they found it, sitting on the black earth in the middle of the storm, that it takes them a few moments to realize where they have seen it before. Angus recognizes it as Jules's crown, and Femi agrees. They silently wonder what kind of violence could have deformed the metal so badly. Angus asks whether anyone saw Jules's face before she cut the cake, remembering that she had looked either very angry or very frightened. Femi asks whether anyone remembers seeing Jules in the marquee after the lights came back on. Angus and Duncan realize they cannot remember seeing her, and a long silence falls over the group as their fear deepens. They look around in the darkness, eyes straining for movement and ears alert for any sound. Then Angus spots something else on the ground nearby and bends to retrieve it. His hand trembles as he lifts it into the light, and they see that it is a single-quart shoe made of pale gray silk with a jeweled buckle on the toe. Several hours earlier, Hannah dances closely with Louise in the crowded tent, using the wild music to forget how stressful and lonely her day has been and how angry she feels toward Charlie. As the music slows, Louise pulls her closer, and she becomes aware that he is hard and pressing against her. She pulls back slightly and suggests getting a drink at the bar. On their way there, Louise explains that he knew Will from university in Edinburgh, where they were both on the rugby team. At the bar, they meet Louise's friend Jethro, and Hannah orders tequila shots for all three of them from Owen, wanting to escape her painful thoughts. As they drink, Jethro and Louise reminisce about their university days, talking about Will's good looks and his success with women, including his time in the Reeling Society. Jethro then mentions the clever northern girl Will once dated who dumped him, and Louise remembers a video that circulated after she left university, with Jethro suggesting that it could probably be on Pornhub by now. As they discuss the video, Hannah realizes with growing horror what they are talking about. Louise notices that she has gone pale and asks if she is all right, but Hannah shoves him away and stumbles outside, where she falls to her hands and knees and vomits. Unlike with her seasickness on the boat, she does not feel any better after vomiting. The sickness runs deeper. The new knowledge feels like a poison that has gone down inside her and reached her very core. Back on the wedding night, Angus holds up the shoe with a shaking hand and asks who was wearing it. But Femi cannot remember because the events of the day now feel strangely distant. Angus wonders whether they should take it with them as a clue, but Femi insists they should leave it where it is because it could be evidence. As they move on, Angus notices that the fierce wind has suddenly stopped. The storm has worn itself out, leaving an eerie stillness in which they can hear their own frightened, hoarse breathing. The Foley finally comes into view, but Femi suddenly stops when his torch catches something on the ground near the edge of the peat bog. The men watch in growing horror as the trembling beam reveals a long, prone human body. The wind makes the edges of its clothing move, creating an unnerving impression of life, making it difficult for the ushers to believe that someone who was recently talking, laughing, and celebrating the wedding with them was lying motionless on the ground. Earlier, Aoife and several members of the waiting staff lift the great wedding cake with infinite care into the center of the marquee, ready for the guests to gather around and watch the cutting of the first slice. Freddie emerges from the catering area carrying a finely wrought knife with a long blade and an elegant mother-of-pearl handle, and asks Aoife if she is all right, noticing the tension on her face. Aoife admits she feels a little overwhelmed, and Freddie understands, reassuring her that it will all be over soon before handing her the knife to place beside the cake. He warns her to tell the guests to be very careful with the blade, explaining that it could cause a nick from the slightest touch. The bride had asked for it to be specially sharpened, and Freddie notes that it will cut through the sponge like butter. Jules stands in the shadows near the cliff edge and overhears the confrontation between Olivia and Will, realizing that her sister and her husband have a past relationship. Hearing Olivia say that she will tell Jules the truth, and seeing Will put a hand over her mouth and grab her arm, shocks Jules even more than what she is hearing. As she watches them, she notices a physical familiarity between them that confirms something intimate has happened between them. Her initial disbelief gives way to the overwhelming realization that Will has humiliated her and made a fool of her. Consumed by rage, Jules rips off her gold crown, throws it to the ground, and stamps on it until it is reduced to a mangled piece of metal. But even destroying the crown is not enough to ease her fury. Jules shines her phone's torch directly onto Olivia and Will, breaking up their confrontation near the cliff edge. Will immediately drops Olivia's arm and steps away from her as Jules calls his name in a completely neutral, slightly impatient voice. Olivia wonders how much Jules has heard or seen, thinking that if she had heard everything, they would probably both be lying at the bottom of the cliff by now. As Jules comes closer, Olivia notices that her half-sister is no longer wearing her gold crown and seems subtly different, though she cannot quite identify what else has changed. When Jules asks what they are doing out there, and says everyone is wondering where Will is, she also mentions that she heard Olivia had fallen. Will immediately returns to his charming manner, and explains that he brought Olivia outside for some air after hearing that she had fallen. Jules accepts the explanation and says it was kind of him, but firmly tells them to come inside because it is time to cut the wedding cake. Back on the wedding night, the ushers move carefully toward the body lying where the peat bog takes over the ground. As their lights sweep across the corpse, they see clumsy, splayed legs, a head thrown back against the ground, vacant, sightless eyes, a half-open mouth with the tongue protruding slightly, and a dark red stain of blood at the sternum. Femi gasps in horror as he realizes it is Will, whose handsome features are now contorted into a mask of agony. Angus retches, while Duncan lets out a sob and crouches to shake the lifeless body, desperately pleading with his friend to get up. The movement makes the head roll from side to side, creating a horrible imitation of life. Angus grabs Duncan and tells him to stop. The men stare down at their fallen friend in shock and grief, their guard completely lowered, and none of them notice a second figure, very much alive, quietly stepping toward them out of the darkness. Earlier, Will walks back to the marquee with Jules, leaving Olivia to make her own way after briefly considering pushing her over the cliff edge. He convinces himself that he is fundamentally a good person, rather than a killer. He reflects on his temporary attraction to Olivia, which was based on lies, hers as much as his. He was drawn to the pretense when they met on their date. She was trying to be someone she was not, pretending to be older and more sophisticated, and her insecurity made him want to corrupt her, much like a girlfriend he had at university who was a smart, hard-working good girl from a crummy school who did not think she was good enough to be there. By contrast, when he met Jules, it felt like fate. He immediately saw how well-matched they were, both physically and in their ambitions, and believed he needed someone like himself, confident, ambitious, and his equal. Will is convinced that Olivia will keep quiet because she doubts herself too much and believes no one would believe her. Still, he senses that she has changed since they arrived on the island and admits that he had not fully considered the consequences of having so many people from his past and present together. He turns his attention to Jono, deciding he must deal with him as soon as he returns to the marquee because he cannot let him reveal their secrets. Will realizes that Jules inviting peers was what exposed Jono to the television opportunity, which he believes Jono himself knows would never have worked. He sees Jono's smoking, drinking, and long memory as dangerous liabilities and recalls the confrontation in the cave, glad that Aoife interrupted them before he could find out what Jono was about to do. Determined not to be caught off guard again, Will resolves to deal with Jono immediately. Hannah tries to look rationally at what she has learned from Jethro and Luis, wondering whether there is even the smallest chance it is a coincidence. She tries to listen to her sensible side, but knows the pieces fit too neatly. She realizes that Will is the man who ruined Alice's life and ended it, and remembers that the video of Alice was posted anonymously. Thinking back to her earlier meeting with Will, when she told him he seemed familiar and must have seen him in one of Jules's photos, she now understands that he was not recognizing her. He was recognizing Alice. A powerful rage rises inside Hannah as she thinks about how Will has flourished while Alice, whom she sees as brighter and better than him, never got her chance. She pushes through the drunken crowd as the lights flicker and go out in the wind, clenching her fists until her nails puncture her palms. When the lights come back on, Charlie announces over the microphone that it is time to cut the cake. Hannah moves closer and stares at Will with hatred as he stands beside Jules and the cake, surrounded by the wedding party and their families. Aoife passes Jules and Will the large knife. They cut into the cake together, exposing its dark red center, while smiling for the cameras. The knife is placed back on the table within Hannah's reach, and she feels a frightening, electric energy running through her. Suddenly, Jules picks up a huge handful of cake and smashes it into Will's face. It looks as violent as a slap or punch. Will staggers back, then pretends to have been hit and jokes that he had better go and wash it off, while the guests cheer and treat it as part of the ceremony. Jules does not smile as Will walks towards the Foley. The band begins to play again, the guests move towards the dance floor, and Hannah remains rooted to the spot as the lights go out again. Olivia knows Will was right, and that she is never going to tell Jules the truth now. She thinks about how he twisted everything around to make her feel as though what happened was her fault, playing on the shame she has felt ever since she first saw him walk through the door with Jules. He has made her feel small, unloved, ugly, stupid, and worthless. He has made her hate herself and driven her away from everyone else, especially her own family, because of the horrible secret. Olivia thinks about how Will grabbed her arm by the cliff, and what might have happened if Jules had not come along. If Jules had seen what was happening, everything would have been different. But she did not see it, and Olivia feels she has missed her chance. No one would believe her if she told them now, or they might blame her. She knows she is not brave enough to tell them, but realizes she could still do something. Then the lights go out. Smashing the cake was not enough for Jules. It felt petty and pathetic. He had let her down completely, just like everyone else in her family had before. She realizes she had overridden her carefully constructed defenses and made herself vulnerable to him. Thinking of him smiling as they cut the cake together, with their hands joined on the cake, disgusts her, especially knowing his hands had been all over her own sister's body. She wonders if he thought about her sister when they slept together, and assumed Jules was too foolish to ever notice. He had underestimated her. Pure rage grows inside her chest and wipes away her shock and grief. Then the lights go out. Jono is outside in the dark wind. He feels like things are appearing out of the night, and puts up his hands to fight them. He keeps seeing the face from his room last night, with the big glasses and the same look the boy wore in the dorm before they killed him. Jono knows that he and Will both killed him, but feels that only his own life has been destroyed by it. Pete Ramsey was passing stuff out, and the effects are finally taking hold of Jono. He thinks about Will acting as though nothing happened and wishes he had finished him off in the cave. Jono tries to find the marquee, but its light seems to keep appearing in different places, nearer and then further away. Then the lights go out. The guests started to panic when the lights went out. Aoife reassures everyone that the generator has failed again because of the wind, and tells them the lights should return within a few minutes if they stay where they are. Will washes the cake off his face in the Foley bathroom after struggling through the wind to get there. He reflects on how humiliating Jules's cake smashing was, and remembers his father watching him with the same grim satisfaction he showed when Will failed to make the first team, get into Oxbridge, or achieve suspiciously high GCSE results. Despite everything he has achieved, Will has never seen his father look proud of him. He wonders whether Jules has realized something, but convinces himself she was only angry about the usher's prank and the disruption. Still, he senses that everything has become fragile and could fall apart. He knows he must return to the marquee and regain control. Looking in the mirror, he trusts his good looks to win people's trust and love. Believing this is why he will always beat someone like Jono. He wipes the last crumb from his mouth, smiles at himself, and then the lights go out. Back on the wedding night, the men crouch over the body. Femi, a surgeon, bends down and listens closely for any breathing, but it is clear from the cloudy eyes, gaping mouth, and dark bloodstain on the chest that the person is dead. None of them notice that another figure has been standing quietly in the darkness at the edge of their circle until he steps into the torchlight. They are horrified to see that he is covered in blood. They don't even recognize him at first because he appears to have bathed in it. He sobs quietly. He raises his hands, and they see the glint of the long wedding cake knife with its mother-of-pearl handle. Femi is the first to speak, saying very slowly and carefully, "Jono, it's all over, mate. Put the knife down." Earlier, during another power cut, Will goes outside and runs into Aoife, who asks him to help with the generator and leads him behind the Foley. Instead of taking him to the generator, she shines a torch directly into his face and reveals that she was responsible for the seaweed prank in his bed. She says she knows about the survival games Will and the others played at Trevelyan's, including what they did to younger boys. Aoife explains that she searched for Will for years and recognized him when she and Freddie watched Survive the Night. She deliberately arranged for Will to come to the island by offering a heavily discounted feature in Jules's magazine because she wanted to confront him and get answers. When Aoife asks whether Will remembers a boy called Darcy Malone, Will initially says he does not. Aoife reminds him that the boys used surnames, so Darcy Malone was known as Loner. She reveals that she still has all of Loner's letters, in which he wrote about Will and Jonathan Briggs, believing that they were his friends. She also tells Will that Loner's grave is on the island, and that his death destroyed her family. Will then remembers a photo of a teenage girl on a beach whom he and Jono used to tease Loner about, and realizes that she was Aoife, Loner's older sister. Aoife asks whether Darcy was frightened at the end, and whether Will tried to save him. She then tells him that Freddie saw Will and Jono enter the dorm that night, and that they seemed excited, as though it were all some big game. When Will seems confused about Freddie, Aoife reminds him that they used to call him Fat Fuck. She also reveals that Freddie was the only boy awake in the dorm and thought they might be coming for him for the survival. So he hid, pretended to be asleep, and said nothing when they carried Darcy away. He has never forgiven himself for failing to stop them. Aoife explains that she learned the full truth after overhearing Will and Jono in the cave and asks Will why stolen exam papers were worth taking a boy's life. Will tries to leave, insisting that Aoife has no proof and that the official story was a tragic accident. He uses his most winning voice and claims that no one would believe her over him. Aoife tells him she knows he will never admit what he did and reveals the devastating effect Loner's death had on her family. Her mother was effectively destroyed by grief, while her father later died of a heart attack. Will tries to dismiss her as bitter and confused, but then notices a gleam of metal in her other hand. After the ushers find Will's body, Jono realizes that pulling the knife from Will's chest probably only increased the bleeding. When Femi, Angus, and Duncan find him in the darkness holding the knife, they shout at him to drop it, but he cannot explain what happened or how he found Will lying in the storm with the knife buried deep in his chest. He remembers realizing that, despite everything, he still loved Will, and hugging him while crying. The other ushers restrain him like a wild animal until the Gardai arrive by boat, and Jono notices the fear in their eyes and feels that they know he was never really one of them. Arrested and handcuffed, he knows he will be taken to the mainland and tried for murdering his best friend. Jono admits that he had thought about killing Will in the cave, even considering picking up a rock, and for a moment it seemed like the easiest and best thing to do. But he insists he did not kill Will, despite having hazy memories and blank spots after taking the pill from Pete Ramsey. He points out that he was not even in the tent, so he cannot understand how he could have taken the knife. He knows he is still responsible for Loner's death because he was the one who tied the boy up, even though Will made sure he did it. He also remembers the strange figure he saw in his room the night before and wonders whether it might have been the ghost of Loner, though he thinks it was more likely something created by his own mind after carrying the guilt for years. As he considers the jail cell waiting for him, Jono realizes that in some ways he has already been imprisoned since the morning the tide came in. He sees his arrest as possibly being justice for what he and Will did, but insists that he did not kill his best friend, and therefore someone else did. After confronting Will earlier, Aoife lifts the knife. She had told Freddie that she only wanted to bring Will there to speak to him, which was true, at least at first. But overhearing Will in the cave and hearing his complete lack of remorse changed her mind. She thinks about the 4 lives destroyed by that night and decides that one guilty life is a fair price for an innocent one. She wants Will to experience even a small part of the terror her little brother must have felt as he lay on the beach, waiting for the sea to come in. She keeps the torch trained on his widening eyes, letting him see the blade in the light. Then, for her little brother, she stabs Will in the heart. Several hours later, the wind has stopped and the Irish police have arrived, gathering everyone in the marquee and explaining what happened and who they found. Olivia sits quietly, shocked and unable to speak, wondering whether she somehow caused Will's death. She remembers seeing the cake knife and thinking about killing him, and for a moment worries that she might actually have done it and somehow blanked it out. Jules then approaches wearing a foil blanket over her wedding dress and grips Olivia's bare shoulder tightly. She whispers that she knows about Olivia and Will. Olivia expects Jules to hate her, but then sees tears fill her eyes. Jules reaches for her, hugs her, and begins crying with loud, angry sobs. There has always been a distance between the two sisters, but for a moment it disappears. In the middle of all the shock and trauma of the night, it is simply the two of them. The next day, Hannah and Charlie travel back to the mainland by boat, while most of the guests have already left and the family are staying behind. Hannah looks back at the island and feels physically and emotionally shattered after discovering that Will was effectively responsible for her sister Alice's death. She thinks about how, less than 48 hours earlier, she had clung to Charlie on the ferry crossing to the island, and they had laughed together despite how awful she had felt, and the memory now stings. She and Charlie barely speak or even look at each other, both lost in their thoughts about the events of the weekend and what has been broken between them. Hannah knows they will have to face their relationship once they return to normal life. Despite everything, she feels that one part of the mystery has finally been resolved. She now has the answer to the question she has carried since Alice died. She does not consider it closure because the wound will never fully heal, and she is angry that she never got the chance to confront Will. Still, she sees his death as a form of revenge for Alice, and only regrets that she did not get the chance to plunge the knife into him herself.